Yesterday I talked about how Genesis 10 talked about how the sons of Noah all had their own languages. Then we move into Genesis 11. Starts off with, now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there and make bricks, blah, blah, blah. And they were going to build a tower to heaven, which, like, makes sense. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You would think that the heavens are going to be, the people up top. Now, Genesis 11 is a whole thing, blah, blah, blah. But the Lord scatters them all over the earth, and they stop building the city. That is why it is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world, and then he scattered them all over the face of the earth. So there's people everywhere. There's Noah's sons, Noah's grandsons at this point, basically talking like they're here, they're there, they move over the whole earth. It's it's an interesting story because we talk about language development being a thing that is unique to where you live. For example, where I live, I speak English. A couple hundred miles away, people speak English and French because it's Canada. A couple thousand miles away, people speak Spanish. Couple th- couple thousand miles further away from that, they speak Portuguese. That's Brazil. But then you think about it, like in biblical times, there was ancient Egyptian, there was the Semitic languages like ancient Hebrew. I don't know if Arabic existed at the time or not. I assume it did before the time of Jesus, because I know Aramaic ended up existing because that was what Jesus spoke. And you've got all these different languages, and you've got the Afro-Asiatic languages, you've got the Indo-Aryan languages, which English is a part of. Indo I'm sorry, no, English is not an Indo-Aryan language. Indo-Aryan are the Indian languages in that area. And then you've got the Indo-European languages, which is from India and Europe, um, coming from Proto-Indo-European. I know a lot more about Indo-European. Then you've got the Native American languages, which we haven't really been able to study. But all of this is basically just to say, well, we don't know. Because at the time you really didn't know how language developed, so you blame it on God. You're like, God confused the languages. There used to be just one, now there's many. And I think it's a really cute story, and I think it's a good way to explain it. I think it's mean on God's part to have done this, but yeah, if I were God, I wouldn't have done that. But I understand. Like later on in the Bible, God calls himself a jealous God. And like if you're a jealous God, you don't want people coming up to you. And this is only 8 verses. But then 2 years after the flood, when Shem was 100 years old, um, first of all, Shem lived to 500 years old, despite the Lord saying that humans would only live to 120. But then it's like this whole thing about Shem to Abram, and then Abram had a family and a whole bunch of people. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur to the Chaldeans, or of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years, and she died in Haran. Which that's interesting because back in the flood, it talks about how um, no man shall live more than 120 years, and yet we have people who live over 120 years after the flood. And that, I don't know if you guys have ever read Who Wrote the Bible by Dr. Richard Elliott Friedman, but it's a very interesting thing to think about because each different Bible source may not have been, or Bible writer and the redactor may not have seen the other sources. For example, we know that the earliest biblical book written is the book of Job. And that's like way down in the prophets and the wisdom stuff. This is the beginning. Like you would think this would be the first thing written, but no. Like I get it. Like things get written in different ways all the time. But this particularly shows that there were people who didn't take the man's lifespan should be 120 in Noah's flood seriously enough to keep it, or they weren't aware of it and they were a different source, which is really interesting to me. Um, but yeah, it also shows going from number 10, Genesis 10 to Genesis 11, that they were completely different sources. It almost looks complete, to me, Genesis 10 and Genesis 11 are completely different sources because of the languages. Now, I'm not an expert in the Bible by any means, but this is my opinion, but I just find it very interesting that God confused the languages after everybody already had new languages. So, yeah. Thanks for watching.